A phone buzzed against a bathroom sink. A woman's hand grabbed it, shaking. Behind the locked door, a fist pounded the wood. The whole frame rattled. She pressed her back against the cold tile and slid down to the floor. Her thumb found a name in the contacts. She held the phone to her mouth and whispered so low it was barely sound. "Come get me." The pounding stopped. Then a voice on the other side of the door went soft and sweet, and somehow that was worse. 90 miles away, an old man in a leather vest felt his phone go still against his chest. His name was Roy Callahan. People called him Reaper. He looked at the screen, and he stood up in the middle of his sister's wedding. What made a room full of people go silent when he walked out? Stay with me on this one. Now, Roy had not wanted to come to this wedding. Let me tell you that up front. He'd worn the only jacket he owned over a clean black shirt, and he'd left the vest in the truck out of respect, which for a man like Roy was no small thing. He was 61 years old. His hands were scarred across every knuckle. His beard had gone gray years back, and he was sitting in the very last row of a little white church in the Montana hills because his sister Carol asked him to. Family was the one thing Roy Callahan never learned how to say no to. Carol was getting married. Marrying up was how the town put it. Her groom was a man named Wendell Vane, and the Vanes owned half the valley. Cattle Timber, a name that opened doors. Wendell was a widower with 3 grown sons and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Carol wore a pale blue dress and stood at the front of that church looking 20 years younger than she was, and Roy watched her from the back and thought, well, at least she's happy. That was all he wanted for her. He and Carol hadn't spoken much in a decade. Some old wound neither of them could name anymore. But when the invitation came, he drove 11 hours to be there. That's the kind of thing you do. And the whole 11 hours, if I'm being honest, he'd argued with himself about turning around. A man like Roy knows when he's not wanted in a room. He could feel it already before he even got there. The Vanes were a certain kind of people, and Roy was a certain kind of man, and those two kinds don't sit easy at the same table. But Carol had asked, so he'd kept driving. Here's the part that mattered, though. The reason his stomach had been tight all afternoon, it wasn't Carol, it was Delia. Delia was Carol's daughter, 24 years old, quiet, with a laugh she kept small like she was afraid someone might take it from her. Roy had held that girl the day she was born. He taught her to ride a bike in a gravel lot behind a roadhouse. When her own father walked out and never looked back, it was Roy who showed up at her school plays, sitting in the back in that leather vest while the other parents stared. Delia never cared about the stares. She'd wave at him from the stage like he was somebody famous. To her, he was. And 6 months back, Delia had married into the Vanes too. She'd married the youngest son, a soft-spoken kid named Landon. That was how the two families got tangled together in the first place. Carol met Wendell at Delia's wedding, and one thing led to another, and now here they all were. Roy had met the Vanes exactly twice. Twice was enough. There was something about how they talked to their women. A little too much control in the voice. A little too much watching. When a vain man told a vain woman to sit, she sat and she smiled while she did it, and that smile bothered Roy more than any shout ever could. And there was the other son, the middle one, Cole. Cole Vane was 30, built like a door, and he had a way of standing too close to people. At Delia's wedding, Roy had watched Cole put a hand on the back of Delia's neck when Landon wasn't looking, just for a second, just long enough. Delia had gone stiff as a fence post and pulled away, and nobody else saw it, but Roy saw it. He'd filed it away the way old men file things away. He didn't say anything. He should have. He'd think about that later. He'd think about it the whole drive north, matter of fact, and it would eat at him like acid. Now here's what you need to understand about that afternoon. Delia wasn't at the church. She'd stayed back at the Vane Ranch, 90 minutes north, because she'd been sick that morning, or that was the story. Landon had come to the wedding alone. Roy had noticed that too. A young husband showing up without his young wife. He'd noticed, and he'd let it sit because what was he going to do, make a scene at his sister's wedding? He'd even walked up to Landon before the ceremony and asked, real casual, where's Delia, and Landon had looked away and said she wasn't feeling right and Cole had stayed back to keep an eye on her. Cole stayed back. Roy remembered thinking those 3 words wrong. Cole stayed back. But he let it go. God help him, he let it go. So the ceremony went on. Vows and rings and a preacher with a thin voice. Roy sat in the back with his hands folded, feeling out of place in his stiff jacket, counting the minutes until he could go stand by his truck and smoke. Diesel was out there waiting for him. His dog, an old shepherd mix, gray around the muzzle, 12 years on this earth and still riding shotgun everywhere Roy went. Diesel didn't much like crowds either. The 2 of them were a matched set that way. And then his phone buzzed. Roy almost didn't look. You don't check your phone during a wedding, but something made him glance down, and the name on the screen was Delia, and there was a text under it that was just 3 words with no punctuation. Can you come? That was it. Can you come? Then the phone buzzed again in his hand, an actual call this time, and Roy stood up, already moving, already halfway to the door before he'd even lifted it to his ear. He stepped out into the gravel lot and answered. At first he heard nothing, then breathing. Fast, shallow breathing, the kind a person makes when they're trying not to be heard. And then Delia's voice, so quiet he had to press the phone hard against his ear. Uncle Roy, a pause, a sound like a door handle rattling somewhere behind her. Can you come get me, please? I can't. The line cracked. I'm in the bathroom, he won't leave. Landon's not here and Cole won't leave, and I locked the door, but... That was where it stopped, just but. Roy Callahan had been in a lot of rooms in his life. Bad rooms. He'd learned young how to make his voice flat and calm when everything in him wanted to come apart. He used that voice now. I'm coming, he said. You hear me. Don't hang up if you can help it. Keep that door locked. I'm 90 minutes out and I'm gonna make it 60. You just breathe. There was a long fumbling sound. Then a man's voice, muffled through a door, gone soft and sweet the way the hook told you. Delia, come on now, open up. And then the line went dead. Roy stood in that gravel lot with the church music leaking out behind him and the dead phone in his hand, and he did not go back inside. He didn't tell Carol. He didn't tell Landon. He didn't say a word to a living soul. And you might ask why. Why not run in there and grab the boy and say, your wife needs us? I'll tell you why. Because Roy did the math in half a second and knew that a church full of vains would slow him down, would want to talk it out, would make calls, would tell him he was overreacting, and every one of those minutes was a minute Delia didn't have. So he walked to his truck, opened the door, and Diesel lifted his gray head off the seat. Roy climbed in, dropped the leather vest across his own shoulders and turned the key. 90 minutes. In the dark. Not telling anyone where he was going. A man could think a lot of dark thoughts in 90 minutes. Roy tried not to. He kept both hands on the wheel and the needle high and the old dog's chin resting on his thigh, and he drove north into the black. Now here's the thing about that drive. It gave Roy time to remember. He remembered being 19 years old and coming home to find a man he'd never met sitting in the kitchen with his mother, and the way his mother's lip was split, and she smiled anyway and said everything was fine. He remembered how long it took him to understand what he was looking at. He remembered the years after, and the things he did about it, some of which he was not proud of, and some of which he was. Roy Callahan became the kind of man he became for a reason. People saw the vest and the beard and the road name and they made up a story about him. Most of it wasn't true, but this part was. Roy could not, would not, be in a world where a man put his hands on a woman who was calling out for help. That was the one line. He'd built an entire life around that line, and now his Delia was on the other side of a locked door with Cole Vane leaning against it. The road climbed. The pines closed in on both sides. Roy passed a gas station, the last light for 40 miles, and then it was just his headlights and the yellow line and Diesel breathing slow beside him. He called Delia twice more. Both times it went straight to voicemail. That scared him worse than anything. A phone that doesn't ring is a phone that's been taken or dropped or turned off, and none of those were good. He pushed the truck harder. The old engine complained. Roy didn't care. He was doing the math in his head the whole way. If Landon was still at the wedding, then it was just Cole up at that ranch with Delia. Just the two of them. And Roy did not like what that quiet, empty ranch meant. He did not like it at all. He kept telling himself, keep it clean, get her out, don't make it more than it has to be. But underneath that, another voice was warming up, an older voice, the one he'd spent 30 years keeping quiet, and it was saying something different, and it was getting louder with every mile. 40 minutes in, he crested a ridge and could see the valley open up below, and way off across it, a single-yard light burning at the Vane place. His hands tightened on the wheel. He was close now. And then his own phone rang, and the screen said Carol, and Roy almost didn't answer. But he did, because it was his sister, and because some cold part of him needed to know. Roy, Carol's voice was thin and confused. Roy, where'd you go? People are asking. We're about to do the toasts and you just... A pause. Landon can't reach Delia. He's trying her phone and it's off. Is she okay? Roy, do you know something? And Roy Callahan, 10 minutes from that yard light, said the only thing he could say. I'm handling it, Carol. Stay where you are. Keep Landon there with you. And he hung up on his own sister at her own wedding, and he drove the last 10 miles like the devil was behind him. He came up the Vane driveway with his lights off. Old habit. You don't announce yourself. The house was big and low and dark except for one lit window on the ground floor and that yard light throwing long shadows across the dirt. Cole's truck was parked crooked by the porch. Delia's little car was in the garage. He could see it through the open door. So they were here, both of them. Roy parked at the top of the drive, quiet, and cut the engine. He looked at Diesel. You stay, he said. The old dog whined once low, but he stayed. Roy got out and closed the door soft and stood in the dark and listened. For a second, nothing. Crickets, the tick of the cooling engine, a cow somewhere far off. And Roy let himself breathe and let himself think maybe it was over. Maybe Cole gave up and left her be. Maybe she was sitting safe in that bathroom right now waiting on him. The night was so still. He walked toward the porch slow and his shoulders came down an inch and he thought, thank God I'm here, it's quiet, it's over. Then he heard the scream. It came from inside the house, up and sharp and cut off fast, the way a scream sounds when a hand comes down over a mouth. Not a movie scream, a real one. And under it, a heavy thud, a body hitting a wall, and a man's voice saying something low and ugly that Roy couldn't make out and didn't need to. Everything changed in that half a second, because this wasn't a scared girl behind a locked door anymore. That part Roy could have handled slow, talked his way in, kept it clean. No, that sound meant the door was already open. It meant Cole had gotten to her. And the thing that turned Roy's blood to ice water was simple. There were no cars coming, no neighbors for miles, no wedding party for another 80 minutes. Whatever Cole Vane was going to do, he'd worked it out that there'd be no one around to see it. He'd picked his moment. An empty ranch, a wife home alone, a whole family conveniently gathered 90 minutes south. This was never about a man losing his temper at a door. This was a thing Cole had planned. The sick story about Delia being under the weather, him staying back while the family drove off, all of it set up like a table, and Roy had just walked into the middle of it. He stopped thinking like an uncle. He started thinking like the other man, the one he'd spent 30 years trying to leave behind. He crossed the last of that yard without a sound and went up the porch steps and put his hand flat on the front door. Locked. He could hear it clearer now, through the wood. Delia crying, muffled. Cole's voice, that same sweet poison tone, Hold still, just hold still. Roy stepped back and kicked the door in. And listen, before we go into that house, if you've made it this far, if your heart's pounding a little the way mine is telling this, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. It's the only thing that keeps stories like Roy's getting told. Now let's go through that door. The frame splintered and the door swung wide and banged against the inside wall. Roy came through it fast for an old man. The lit window was a hallway lamp. Down that hall a door stood open, and inside was a small back bedroom, and inside that was the whole world gone wrong. Delia was on the floor against the far wall. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. There was blood at the corner of her mouth, and her eye was already swelling. She was holding one arm up in front of her face. And standing over her, big as a door, breathing hard, was Cole Vane. Cole turned when the front door blew in. He straightened up. And here is the thing you have to understand about men like Cole Vane. He wasn't afraid. Not at first. He'd spent his whole life being the biggest thing in every room, being a Vane, being untouchable. He looked at this gray-bearded old man standing in the hall in a leather vest, and he smirked. "You lost, old-timer," he said. Roy didn't answer. He was looking at Delia. "You okay, baby?" he said, and his voice was so gentle it didn't seem to belong to the same body. Delia made a sound and nodded and shook her head both at once. "That's my uncle," she got out. "Cole, that's my Uncle Roy, you don't." "Your uncle," Cole laughed. He took a step toward Roy, cracking his neck, rolling those big shoulders. "Well, uncle, this is family business. You're gonna wanna turn around and get back in your little truck before you get hurt." Now, Cole was 30 years old and 240 pounds, and he'd never lost a fight in his life. Roy was 61 with a bad knee and gray in his beard. On paper, that's not a contest. Cole knew it. He came in swinging, big and confident, a wide right hand meant to take Roy's head off. But here's what Cole didn't know. Roy Callahan had been in 100 fights against men younger and bigger than him, and he'd learned the one thing that beats youth and size every time. He'd learned patience, and he'd learned exactly where a man is soft. A young man fights with his temper. An old man fights with everything he's ever lost. There is no comparison between those two things. Roy didn't try to trade punches. He stepped inside that wild right, took it on the shoulder, and drove the heel of his palm up under Cole's chin. Cole's head snapped back. Roy hooked a boot behind his ankle and put all 61 years of weight into his chest, and Cole Vane went down through a nightstand and hit the floor so hard the lamp jumped. And before he could get his bearings, Roy was on him, one scarred knee across his throat, one hand twisting Cole's arm up behind his back to the edge of breaking. Cole thrashed. He was strong. God, he was strong. But Roy had the leverage, and Roy had the years, and Roy had a reason. He leaned down close to Cole's ear. "You feel that?" Roy said, quiet. "That's how close you are. I've put men in the ground for less than what I just walked in on." He pressed harder. Cole gasped. "But I'm not gonna. You know why? 'Cause that's what you do. And I'm not you." Now I want to be honest with you here, because this is the part that matters. There was a moment. A long moment where Roy Callahan, with that man's life pinned under his knee, wanted to finish it. Every bad thing he'd ever seen was screaming at him to finish it. Delia crying against the wall. His mother's split lip 40 years back. All the times he'd walked away and told himself it wasn't his place. All of it. He held Cole's arm right at the breaking point, and he felt how easy it would be. Just a little more weight. 1 second of letting go of himself. Nobody in that valley would have blamed him. That's the honest truth, and that's what made it so hard. And then he looked up, and Delia was watching him. His Delia. And she wasn't looking at Cole. She was looking at Roy, and there was fear in her face, and it wasn't fear of Cole anymore. It was fear of what her uncle was about to become. And that, right there, pulled Roy back from the edge. He let the arm down. Just an inch. Enough that it wasn't going to break. Delia, he said, not taking his eyes off Cole. Go get my phone out of the truck, and there's a dog in there. Bring him. Then you're gonna call the sheriff and you're gonna tell them exactly what happened here. Every word. You understand me? No more pretending, it's done. Delia got up on shaking legs. She edged past them along the wall and she stopped, and she looked down at Cole Vane pinned and gasping on the floor, this man who'd made her small for 6 months, and something in her face changed. Something came back that had been gone a long time. She didn't say anything to him, she just walked out to get the dog. Sometimes that's the loudest thing a person can do. Cole tried one more time. He got the sweet voice back. Come on, man, it's a misunderstanding. She's dramatic, she gets like this, ask anybody. You break my arm, you're the one going to prison, you know that. A guy like you. They'll believe me. They always believe me. And that right there was the truest thing Cole Vane ever said. They always believe me. That was the whole rotten heart of it. That was why Delia never told. Why Landon never saw. Why a family sat down to a wedding dinner 90 miles away while this went on. Because Cole was a Vane, and the Vanes were believed, and a girl who married in was not. Roy leaned down one last time. Not tonight, he said. Delia came back with Diesel, and the old dog took one look at the man on the floor and stood between him and Delia with his gray hackles up and a growl in his chest, and he did not move from that spot again. Delia called the sheriff. Roy kept Cole pinned the whole 20 minutes it took the county car to come up that long, dark driveway, and he did not loosen his grip, and he did not say one more word. The deputies who came were young and nervous. They knew the Vane name. Roy could see them doing the math, an outlaw in a leather vest kneeling on a local rich man's son, and he could see which way that math was leaning. But then one of them got a good look at Delia. At her torn dress and her swelling eye and the blood, and the way she flinched when Cole so much as shifted. And the math changed in that deputy's face. He crouched down in front of Delia, real gentle, and he said, "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" And Delia told him, all of it, not just tonight, the 6 months of it. Every word came out of her like something coming loose, and Roy stood there and let her talk, and he did not have to say a thing. They put Cole Vane in the back of the county car in handcuffs, and he was not smirking anymore. He was calling out threats about his father and his lawyers, and how none of this would stick. Roy watched the taillights go down the driveway and out of sight, and only then did he let himself feel how tired he was. Here's what happened after, because the after matters as much as the fight, and I don't want you to miss it. Carol and Landon got there near midnight, having torn up the same road Roy drove, once the sheriff's call reached the wedding. Landon came through that broken front door and saw his wife's face and just folded, went down on his knees in front of her. And Delia looked at her young husband, and here is the part that surprised even Roy. She wasn't angry at Landon. She was heartbroken for him, because Landon truly hadn't known. He'd been raised in that house to not see it, same as everyone. And now he had to look at it straight on, at his own brother, and it broke something in him and started to build something new at the same time. He held Delia's hand and he said, over and over, "I believe you, I'm sorry, I believe you," which is the thing she'd needed somebody in that family to say for 6 months. Carol found Roy out on the porch. He was sitting on the top step with Diesel's head in his lap, looking at the dark valley. She sat down next to him. For a while neither of them said anything. 10 years of not talking sat down on that step with them. "You knew," Carol finally said. "At the first wedding, you saw something, didn't you?" "I saw a hand on her neck," Roy said, "and I didn't do a thing about it. Told myself it wasn't my place." He rubbed the dog's ear. "That's the part I gotta live with, Carol. Not tonight. Tonight I did fine. It's the 6 months before it. All the times I could have said something and told myself to mind my business." Carol put her hand over her brother's scarred hand. "You came tonight," she said. "She called you. Out of everyone she could have called, out of that whole family, she called you. You know what that means?" Roy didn't answer. He couldn't right then. "It means she knew," Carol said. "Somewhere in her, all these years, she knew there was one person who'd walk out of anything and come. That's not nothing, Roy. That's the only thing." Now the Vanes did what families like that do. Wendell hired the lawyers. There were phone calls, and there were quiet offers, and there were not-so-quiet threats. For a few weeks it looked like Cole might just walk, the way men like Cole so often do. They always believe me. But this time it didn't hold, because Delia stood up. Once one woman stands up, it's amazing who else finds her voice. A cousin came forward, then a girl Cole had dated in high school, then another. It turned out Cole Vane had left a long trail, and everyone had spent years agreeing not to look at it. Delia looking at it was the thing that gave the rest of them permission. Cole went to prison, not for as long as he should have, but he went, and Carol did not marry Wendell Vane. She stood at the top of that aisle in her mind, and she saw the whole family clear for the first time, saw what they protected and what they buried, and she walked away from all that money without one look back. She said later it was the easiest hard thing she ever did. Delia and Landon left the valley. Last Roy heard, they were up in the high country running a little outfit of their own, and Delia laughed loud now, the way she used to before she learned to keep it small. She sent Roy a photo every few weeks. Nothing much. A sunrise. A horse. Diesel got a package in the mail once, a whole box of good bones, addressed to him by name, and Roy read the card out loud to the old dog and had to stop halfway through. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing about that whole night. Everybody in that wedding party, every single one of them, had known something was wrong for a long time. They'd all felt it, and none of them said it. It took a man they'd all quietly looked down on, an outlaw in a leather vest they didn't want at the family table, to be the one who picked up the phone and drove 90 miles in the dark and kicked in a door. Roy Callahan wasn't the respectable one. He wasn't the rich one or the polished one. He was just the one who came, and the person who ended up thanking him. That surprised everybody too. Because a year on, at a small quiet backyard wedding, Landon Vane stood up with a glass in his hand in front of the few people who mattered, and he looked at a gray-bearded old man sitting in the back in a leather vest, and he said, "To the man who taught me what a husband's supposed to be." He never said a word about it. He just showed up. And the whole yard turned to look at Roy, and this time nobody stared like he didn't belong. They stared like they wished they'd been half as good. Roy just raised his own glass a couple inches, nodded, reached down and scratched an old gray dog behind the ears. That was all. That was always all a man like Roy ever needed to say. Some men carry a power that has nothing to do with the size of their fists. Roy earned the right to be told that at the end because he lived it first. He drove into the dark not knowing what he'd find, and he found the worst of it, and he did not let the worst of it turn him into the worst of himself. That's the whole thing right there. That's the story. He came when she called. Believe me, in this life, that's the rarest thing there is.